You are blessed to serve the Luna. She is kind, generous, and you will want for nothing under her care. That's what the palace steward told Lily Jenkins on her first day as a servant in the Crystal Moon Palace. But Lily would learn that kindness had a price tag she could never afford. And that hunger, true, bone-deep hunger, could make you do things that would shatter your last shred of dignity. Because when you're invisible enough, when you're worthless enough, even the Luna's generosity will skip right over you. And when an alpha king finds his mate's servant digging through garbage like a starving animal, the rage that follows doesn't just shake a palace. It breaks it wide open. Chapter 1. The Invisible Girl. Lily Jenkins had been invisible her entire life. Not literally, of course, though sometimes she wished for that kind of mercy. No. Lily was invisible in the way that truly powerless people are. Seen but not noticed. Present but not acknowledged. Alive but not quite real to anyone who mattered. She learned this truth early, growing up in the orphanage on the outskirts of the Crystal Moon Pact territory. While the other children, stronger, prettier, louder, were chosen for apprenticeships and adoptions, Lily remained. Year after year, she watched them leave while she stayed behind, too plain to be wanted, too weak to be useful, too quiet to be remembered. "You're lucky," Matron Beulah Levine used to say, her voice dripping with the kind of false comfort that made Lily's stomach turn. "Some wolves are meant for greatness. Others are meant to serve. At least you'll always have a place in this world, even if it's at the bottom." Lily never argued. What was the point? By the time she turned 18, her fate was sealed. No family wanted her. No pack would claim her as anything more than an Omega, the lowest rank, reserved for those with wolf blood so diluted it barely registered. Her wolf, when it finally emerged during her first shift, was a pitiful thing. Small, gray, unremarkable. It whimpered instead of howled. Even her own wolf knew they were nothing. So when the palace sent word that they needed additional servants for the Luna's household, Lily jumped at the chance. It was survival, not ambition. The orphanage would kick her out soon anyway. They had younger mouths to feed, more promising futures to cultivate. At least at the palace. She'd have a roof over her head and meals provided. Or so she thought. The Crystal Moon Palace was a sprawling marvel of white stone and silver spires, perched atop the highest hill in the territory. It gleamed in the sunlight like something out of a fairy tale, beautiful and untouchable. Lily had only seen it from a distance before, a glittering dream that felt worlds away from the gray orphanage walls. Walking through its golden gates for the first time, she felt like an imposter. "Keep up, girl," barked Pat McMillan, the head steward, as he led her and 3 other new servants through the winding corridors. His voice echoed off the marble floors, sharp and impatient. "The Luna's household runs on precision and discipline. You're here to work, not gawk." Lily ducked her head and hurried after him, her worn shoes squeaking against the polished stone. The other servants, all prettier, all more confident, whispered and giggled behind their hands. Lily caught fragments of their excitement. "I heard the Luna is the most beautiful she-wolf in the realm. And the Alpha King, Tomas Olsen, they say he'd burn down kingdoms for her. We're so lucky to serve her." Lily said nothing. She focused on memorizing the route, left at the fountain with the marble wolves, right past the grand staircase, straight through the corridor lined with portraits of previous alphas. Her mind catalogued every detail, desperate not to get lost in this maze of wealth and power. Finally, they stopped in front of a set of ornate double doors carved with images of a full moon. Pat knocked twice, then pushed them open. "My Luna," he said, bowing deeply. "The new servants have arrived." Lily stepped inside and her breath caught. The room was magnificent. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating silk curtains that billowed in the breeze. Fresh flowers overflowed from crystal vases. Plush rugs covered the marble floors. Everything smelled of jasmine and wealth. And in the center of it all, seated on a velvet chaise like a queen on her throne, was Luna Lolita Conley. She was breathtaking. Golden hair cascaded down her back in perfect waves. Her emerald eyes sparkled with warmth and intelligence. Her smile was radiant, the kind that made you want to smile back even if you had nothing to smile about. She wore a gown of pale blue silk that probably cost more than Lily would earn in a lifetime. "Welcome," Lolita said, her voice like honey. She stood gracefully and approached them, her movements fluid and elegant. "I'm so glad you're here. I know palace life can be overwhelming at first, but I promise you'll be well cared for in my household." The other servants practically glowed under her attention. They curtsied and murmured their thanks, their faces bright with adoration. Lily curtsied too, keeping her eyes down. Something about Lolita's perfection made her feel even smaller, even more inadequate, like standing next to the sun and realizing you were barely a spark. Lolita moved down the line, greeting each servant personally, learning their names, complimenting something about each of them. When she reached Lily, she paused. "And you are?" "Lily Jenkins, my Luna," Lily whispered. Lolita's smile didn't waver, but something flickered in her eyes, something cold and assessing that vanished so quickly Lily thought she'd imagined it. "Lily," Lolita repeated, her tone still sweet. "What a plain name, but I suppose plain can be useful in its own way." She tilted her head, studying Lily like one might study an insect. "You're quite small, aren't you? Almost. Fragile looking." "Yes, my Luna," Lily said. Because what else could she say? "Well." Lolita's smile brightened again, warm and gracious. "Everyone has their place. I'm sure we'll find yours." She turned back to Pat. "See that they're settled in the servants' quarters. And make sure they understand the household rules." "Of course, my Luna." Pat bowed again. As they were let out, Lily glanced back once. Lolita had returned to her chaise, already chatting with her lady's maid, Krista Simmons, a stunning brunette who'd served the Luna for years. Neither of them looked in Lily's direction. Invisible again. The servants' quarters were located in the palace's east wing, far from the luxurious chambers of the royal family. The room Lily was assigned was small but clean. A narrow bed, a wooden chest for belongings, a single window that overlooked the kitchen gardens. She shared a bathroom with 5 other servants. It was more than she'd had at the orphanage. "Listen carefully," Pat said, gathering all the new servants in the hallway. "Luna Lolita runs a generous household, but she expects perfection in return. You will wake at dawn. You will complete your assigned tasks without complaint. You will be invisible unless called upon. And you will never speak of household matters outside these walls. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they chorused. "Good." Pat's stern expression softened slightly. "Work hard, keep your heads down, and you'll be fed and housed better than most wolves in this territory. The Luna takes care of those who serve her well. Fed and housed." Lily clung to those words. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the palace settling around her, distant footsteps, muffled voices, the whisper of wind through stone corridors. For the first time in years, she felt something close to hope. Maybe here she could build a life. Maybe here she could finally belong, even if only in the shadows. She didn't know yet how wrong she was. She didn't know that the Luna's kindness was a performance, carefully maintained for everyone who mattered, and that Lily, plain little Lily with her gray wolf and her quiet voice, would never matter enough to deserve even scraps of that kindness. She didn't know that hunger was waiting for her, patient and cruel. She didn't know that in 6 months, an alpha king would find her eating garbage. But that night, she allowed herself to hope. And hope, for the invisible girl, was the cruelest curse of all. Chapter 2, The Hierarchy of Hunger. The first week at the Crystal Moon Palace, Lily ate like she'd never eaten before. Breakfast was porridge with honey and fresh berries. Lunch was roasted chicken with vegetables from the palace gardens. Dinner was hearty stews, warm bread, and sometimes even dessert apple tarts that melted on her tongue, sweet and impossible. She couldn't believe her luck. The servants' dining hall was a large, bustling room in the lower level of the palace, filled with long wooden tables and the constant chatter of staff. Cooks, gardeners, stable hands, chambermaids, they all ate together, a small community bound by their service to the royal family. Lily sat at the end of one table, away from the clusters of friends and familiar faces. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, still half convinced someone would snatch the plate away and tell her it was all a mistake. "You're the new one, right?" a voice asked. Lily looked up. A girl about her age stood across from her, holding a tray. Esther Finley, one of the kitchen maids. She had warm brown eyes and flour dusted on her cheek. "Yes," Lily said quietly. "Lily Jenkins." "Esther." She sat down with a friendly smile. "You're in the Luna's household?" Lily nodded. "Lucky you," Esther said, though something in her tone was odd. Not envious, more like cautious. "The Luna's servants always get the best assignments. Light work, nice quarters." She took a bite of bread. "Just keep your head down, yeah? Some of the higher-ranking staff can be territorial." "I will," Lily promised. "Thank you." Esther smiled again, warmer this time. "If you ever need anything, find me in the kitchens. We orphans have to stick together, right?" Lily's chest tightened. "You too?" "Yep, Greenwood Orphanage, 2 territories over." Esther's eyes sparkled with shared understanding. We know what it's like to scrape by. Makes you appreciate a full belly. For the first time since arriving, Lily felt seen. Not invisible, but recognized by someone who understood. They talked quietly while they ate, comparing stories about strict matrons and cold winter nights. When Esther had to return to the kitchens, she squeezed Lily's shoulder. "You'll do fine here," she said. "Just remember, palace life looks pretty on the surface. But there's always politics underneath. Stay invisible, like you said. It's safer." Lily watched her go, feeling grateful and unsettled in equal measure. Stay invisible. She was good at that. By the second week, Lily had settled into her routine. Her primary duty was attending to Luna Lolita's chambers, changing linens, organizing the vast wardrobe, polishing silver, arranging fresh flowers. The Luna was rarely in her rooms during the day. She spent her time in the garden pavilion, hosting teas with high-ranking she-wolves, or attending court functions with Alpha King Tomas. Lily caught glimpses of the Alpha King sometimes, usually from a distance. Tomas Olsen was everything an alpha should be: tall, broad-shouldered, devastatingly handsome with dark hair and storm-gray eyes. His presence commanded attention even when he was silent. When he walked through the palace corridors, people moved aside instinctively, their heads bowed in respect. But it was the way he looked at Lolita that stuck in Lily's memory. Like she was his entire world. Like he would tear apart anyone who threatened her happiness. Once, Lily had been arranging flowers in the Luna's sitting room when Tomas arrived unexpectedly. She'd frozen, unsure whether to announce herself or simply disappear, but he hadn't even noticed her. His eyes had gone straight to Lolita, who'd laughed and thrown herself into his arms. "You're back early." Lolita had purred, kissing him. "Couldn't stay away," he'd murmured back, his voice rough with affection. Lily had slipped out silently, unnoticed. Invisible. It should have felt normal, she was a servant, after all. But something about being so thoroughly erased, even from the edges of a moment, made her chest ache. Still, she pushed the feeling down. She had food, she had shelter, she had work. That was enough. It had to be enough. The change started in the third week. Lily arrived at breakfast as usual, her stomach growling after the morning's chores. But when she reached the serving line, the cook, a stern-faced woman named Mona Nixon, looked right through her. "Next," Mona called, gesturing to the servant behind Lily. Lily blinked. I haven't gotten my plate yet." Mona's eyes flickered to her briefly, cold and dismissive. Luna's direct household staff eat after general palace servants. New rule. Step aside. But, step aside. Confused and embarrassed, Lily moved to the side. She waited while the other servants filed through, filling their plates. By the time they finished, the serving dishes were nearly empty. Mona scraped what remained, a thin gruel, some wilted vegetables, onto a small plate and shoved it at Lily. "There, move along." Lily stared at the meager portion. It was barely a meal. But she took it without arguing and found a seat at the end of the table. Across the hall, she noticed Krista Simmons, the Luna's head lady's maid, eating a full breakfast, her plate piled high. Krista caught her looking and smiled, a sharp, knowing curve of her lips. Lily looked away quickly, her face hot. Maybe it was just a mistake. A miscommunication about the new rules. But at lunch, the same thing happened. And at dinner. By the end of the week, Lily's stomach was a constant hollow ache. "Are you eating enough?" Esther's concerned voice broke through Lily's thoughts. They were in the palace gardens, where Lily had been sent to gather fresh lavender for the Luna's bath. Esther had come out to collect herbs for the kitchens. "I'm fine," Lily said automatically. "You're not." Esther frowned, studying her. "You've gotten thinner, and you look exhausted." Lily wanted to deny it, but the truth was written on her body. Her uniform hung looser than before. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She felt weak all the time now, shaky and unfocused. "There's a new rule," she said finally, keeping her voice low. "Luna's household staff eat last. By the time I get to the line, there's barely anything left." Esther's frown deepened. "That doesn't sound right. The Luna's household has always been well-fed, it's part of the prestige." "Maybe it's different for lower-ranking servants," Lily said. "Krista and the senior staff still get full meals. It's just, people like me." "People like you," Esther repeated, her tone angry now. "You mean the ones nobody's watching out for?" Lily shrugged, trying to seem unconcerned even as her stomach cramped with hunger. "It's fine. I'm used to getting by on less." "That's not fine, Lily." Esther grabbed her hand. Listen, come to the kitchens tonight after the evening shift. I'll sneak you something. The head cook won't notice. No, Lily pulled away gently but firmly. I can't risk getting you in trouble. Or myself. If they catch us breaking rules that are starving you, are still rules. Lily forced a smile she didn't feel. I'll figure it out. I always do. Esther looked like she wanted to argue more, but a sharp voice called her name from the kitchen doorway. She squeezed Lily's hand once more, hard. Promise me you'll ask for help if it gets worse. Lily nodded, even though they both knew it was a lie. Because asking for help meant being noticed. And being noticed, in Lily's experience, only brought more pain. Better to stay invisible. Better to endure. That night, Lily lay in bed with her stomach gnawing at itself, trying to remember what fullness felt like. The palace was silent around her, everyone else asleep. Through her small window, she could see the lights of the main palace glowing golden in the darkness, warm, abundant, unreachable. She thought about the Luna's chambers, where she'd worked that afternoon. The sitting room had been filled with half-eaten pastries from Lolita's afternoon tea, delicate cakes with cream and berries, barely touched. Sandwiches with the crusts cut off, abandoned after a single bite. Lily had cleared them away as instructed, carrying the tray down to the scullery where such things were discarded. So much waste. So much food, thrown away without a thought. Her stomach cramped again, sharp enough to make her curl on her side. It's temporary, she told herself. Things will get better. They have to. But deep down, in the part of her that had learned cruelty early and never forgotten, she knew the truth. Things were only going to get worse. Because when you're invisible, when you're worthless, the world doesn't just ignore you. It forgets you exist at all, even when you're starving right in front of it. Chapter 3. The Cruelty of Kindness. By the 4th week, Lily had learned to move through the palace like a ghost. She woke before dawn, her body weak and trembling from lack of food. She performed her duties in the Luna's chambers with mechanical precision, smoothing silk sheets that smelled of lavender, polishing mirrors until they gleamed, arranging hothouse roses in crystal vases. Her hands shook sometimes, making the delicate work harder, but she forced herself to be perfect. Perfect servants didn't get noticed. Perfect servants didn't get punished. The hunger had become a constant companion now, a hollow ache that never quite left. She'd stopped going to the servants' dining hall for breakfast. There was no point. The scraps she received weren't worth the humiliation of watching Krista and the senior staff eat their fill while she waited like a beggar. Instead, she rationed the meager portions from lunch and dinner, hiding bits of bread in her pockets to eat later when the gnawing became unbearable. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But she survived. That's what she was good at, surviving. Lily. She jumped at the sound of her name, nearly dropping the armful of soiled linen she was carrying. Luna Lolita stood in the doorway of her dressing room, beautiful as always in a gown of emerald silk that matched her eyes. Yes, my Luna? Lily curtsied quickly, her heart racing. Lolita smiled, that warm, radiant smile that made everyone love her. Come here, dear. I want to talk to you. Dread coiled in Lily's stomach. But she obeyed. Setting down the linens and approaching carefully, Lolita gestured to a velvet settee. Sit with me. Lily hesitated. Servants didn't sit with the Luna. But Lolita patted the cushion insistently, still smiling. Don't be shy. I won't bite. Lily perched on the very edge of the settee, her spine rigid, her hands folded in her lap. Lolita settled beside her, close enough that Lily could smell her perfume, expensive, floral, overwhelming. I've been watching you, Lolita said softly. You work so hard, Lily, so diligently, never complaining, never asking for anything. She reached out and tucked a strand of Lily's dull brown hair behind her ear, the gesture almost maternal. That's admirable. Truly. Thank you, my Luna, Lily whispered, confused and frightened in equal measure. But I've noticed you've gotten thinner. Lolita's green eyes studied her with what looked like genuine concern. Are you feeling unwell? Is something troubling you? This was a test. It had to be. Lily had learned in the orphanage that authority figures never really wanted honesty. They wanted submission disguised as honesty. They wanted you to prove you could suffer silently. I'm fine, my Luna, she said carefully. Just adjusting to palace life. It's much busier than I'm used to. Lolita tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. You know, if you ever need anything extra food, perhaps a day to rest, you should simply ask. I take care of my household staff. That's what a good Luna does. The words were kind, the tone was sweet, but something in Lolita's eyes was cold, assessing. Like a cat watching a mouse, deciding whether to play or pounce. "You're very generous, my Luna," Lily said, keeping her voice steady. "But I'm managing well. I don't want to be a burden." "Oh, you could never be a burden." Lolita squeezed her hand, her touch gentle but somehow suffocating. "We're all part of one pack family here. Your well-being matters to me." She paused, then added with a light laugh, "Though I suppose I understand why you'd hesitate to ask. Krista tells me you've been struggling to adapt to our household schedule. Missing meals because you're too slow with your work." Lily's blood went cold. That was a lie. She'd never missed her duties, never been late or careless. The meals she missed were because there was no food left by the time she was allowed to eat. But calling Lolita a liar or even suggesting Krista had misrepresented things would be suicide. "I'll work harder," Lily said quietly. "I'll be faster. That's the spirit." Lolita's smile brightened, warm and encouraging. She stood gracefully, smoothing her gown. "I knew you were a good choice for my household. Keep up the excellent work, Lily. And remember, my door is always open if you need guidance." She swept out of the room, leaving behind the cloying scent of her perfume and the weight of unspoken threats. Lily sat frozen on the settee, her hands trembling. She understood now. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Lolita knew exactly what was happening. She knew Lily was being starved, isolated, worked to exhaustion. And she'd just made it clear that if Lily complained, if she broke the illusion of the Luna's benevolent household, she would be branded as ungrateful, lazy, a liar. The perfect trap. Lily could suffer in silence. Or she could speak up and lose everything. She chose silence. She always chose silence. That afternoon, while cleaning the Luna's sitting room, Lily found the tea service. It was sitting on a side table, forgotten from Lolita's morning entertainment. 3 silver tiers of delicate pastries, finger sandwiches, petit fours dusted with sugar. Most of them had been partially eaten, single bites taken, then abandoned. Lily stared at the food, her stomach cramping so hard it made her dizzy. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't. But her hands moved before her brain could stop them. She grabbed a small sandwich, cucumber and cream cheese on white bread, the crusts carefully removed, and shoved it into her mouth. It was the most delicious thing she'd ever tasted. She ate another. Then a pastry. Then another sandwich. Her hands shook as she devoured the abandoned food, barely chewing, barely tasting anything beyond sweet and salt and blessed fullness. Well, Lily froze, a half-eaten tart clutched in her hand. Krista Simmons stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on her beautiful face. Behind her stood 2 other senior maids, Joyce Woods and Karen Pratt, both wearing identical expressions of disgust. "Stealing from the Luna," Krista said, her voice dripping with false shock. "I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." "I wasn't," Lily's voice cracked. "These were being thrown away. Thrown away by whose authority?" Krista stepped closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "You think just because the Luna is finished with her tea, you have the right to eat her food like some stray dog? I'm sorry. You're pathetic." Krista snatched the tart from Lily's hand and threw it to the floor, grinding it under her heel. "Look at you. Filthy little Omega, too weak to earn your keep, too greedy to know your place." Joyce laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Should we tell the Luna? I'm sure she'd love to know her charity case is a thief." Terror flooded Lily's veins. Please, I'll never do it again. I promise." "Oh, you won't," Krista agreed. Her smile turned vicious. "Because if I ever catch you taking what doesn't belong to you again, I'll make sure you're thrown out of this palace so fast you won't have time to pack your pathetic belongings. And trust me, the Luna will believe whatever I tell her." She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper only Lily could hear. "You're nothing. You've always been nothing. The only reason you're still here is because watching you starve entertains me. So keep your head down, keep your mouth shut, and maybe we'll let you stay long enough to be useful." She straightened, her expression shifting back to pleasant neutrality. "Clean up this mess," she ordered. "And next time you're hungry, remember you're only here because we allow it." The 3 of them swept out, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Lily stood alone in the beautiful room, surrounded by luxury and waste, her body shaking with humiliation and rage and helpless, crushing despair. She dropped to her knees and began gathering the ruined food from the floor, her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Because crying didn't change anything. Crying didn't fill empty stomachs. Crying didn't make you matter. She was nothing. She'd always been nothing. And nothing was all she'd ever be. Chapter 4. The Descent. 6 weeks into her service at the Crystal Moon Palace, Lily Jenkins stopped recognizing herself in the mirror. Her face had hollowed out. Cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin stretched too tight. Her uniform hung off her frame like a burial shroud. Dark circles ringed her eyes not just from lack of sleep, but from the constant, grinding exhaustion of a body consuming itself to survive. She moved through her days in a fog, performing her duties on autopilot. Straighten the Luna's bed, polish the silver, arrange the flowers, smile when spoken to, disappear when not needed. Stay invisible. Stay silent. Stay alive. The hunger had evolved beyond physical pain into something else, a numbness that made everything feel distant and unreal. Sometimes she'd find herself standing in the middle of a room, unable to remember how she'd gotten there or what she was supposed to be doing. Other servants noticed, of course. She caught their whispers, their sidelong glances. Is she sick? Maybe she's just lazy. I heard she barely eats. Probably some eating disorder. Attention-seeking. If you ask me. Nobody asked her. Nobody helped her. Even Esther had grown cautious after Lily repeatedly refused her offers of smuggled food. The friendship cooled into polite distance, not cruelty, just self-preservation. Everyone in the palace knew that associating with someone in Krista's bad graces was dangerous. So Lily was alone. Truly, completely alone. It was on a Tuesday evening, during the Luna's weekly banquet, that Lily's world finally shattered. The great hall glittered with candlelight and crystal, filled with high-ranking pack members dressed in their finest. Alpha King Tomas sat at the head of the long table, devastating in his formal attire, his hand resting possessively on Lolita's. The Luna glowed like a jewel, her golden hair crowned with diamonds, her emerald gown shimmering with every movement. They looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful, powerful, perfectly matched. Lily and the other servants moved through the hall like shadows, refilling wine glasses, clearing plates, ensuring the celebration ran smoothly. The scent of roasted meat and fresh bread and rich desserts filled the air, overwhelming and torturous. Lily's hands trembled as she carried a heavy tray of empty dishes toward the kitchen. Her vision swam. She'd eaten nothing but a thin slice of bread that morning, all she'd managed to pocket from yesterday's meager dinner ration. Just make it through tonight, she told herself. Just a few more hours. She was passing behind the Luna's chair when it happened. Her legs gave out. Not dramatically, there was no graceful faint, no theatrical collapse. Her knees simply stopped working, buckling without warning. The tray slipped from her numb fingers and crashed to the floor with a sound like thunder. Porcelain shattered. Crystal exploded into glittering shards. Wine spread across the marble floor like blood. The entire hall fell silent. Lily found herself on her hands and knees in the wreckage, her body shaking, her mind blank with shock and terror. She tried to stand, but her muscles wouldn't obey. Weakness pinned her to the floor like an insect under glass. What on earth? Lolita's voice, sharp with surprise. Lily forced her head up. The Luna was staring down at her, green eyes wide. Around the table, dozens of important wolves watched the spectacle, with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to pity. And then there was Alpha King Tomas. His storm-gray eyes locked onto Lily with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floor. For a moment, just a fleeting second, something like concern flashed across his face. But then Krista was there, materializing at the Luna's side with perfect timing. "I'm so sorry, my Luna, Alpha King," Krista said smoothly, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "This one has been struggling with her duties. I believe she may have developed some sort of illness. We've tried to help her, but she refuses proper meals, refuses to see the healer. I'm afraid she might be doing this for attention." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lily saw the way the expressions shifted: concern, turning to judgment, pity hardening into contempt. "No," Lily whispered. But her voice was too weak to carry. "That's not." "Poor dear," Lolita said, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. She stood and moved to Lily's side, crouching down in her beautiful gown. To anyone watching, it looked like a compassionate Luna comforting a troubled servant. Only Lily was close enough to see the coldness in those emerald eyes. "You've been working yourself too hard, haven't you?" Lolita said softly, reaching out to brush Lily's hair back with false tenderness. "I've told you so many times to take care of yourself, to ask for help when you need it, but you just won't listen. Her fingers tightened in Lily's hair, not quite painful, but a warning. "I think you need rest," Lolita continued, her voice still gentle, still concerned. "Krista, take her back to her quarters. Make sure she eats something and gets proper sleep. We'll discuss her future with the household in the morning." The threat was clear: behave, or you're finished. Lily wanted to scream. She wanted to tell the truth, that she was being starved, that the help offered was a lie, that the Luna's kindness was a beautiful mask over casual cruelty. But who would believe her? A nobody Omega, too weak to even carry a tray, accusing the beloved Luna of malice. She'd be branded as delusional, vindictive, insane. She'd lose everything and gain nothing. So she did what she always did. She stayed silent. Krista hauled her to her feet with rough efficiency, supporting her weight with obvious disgust. As they headed toward the servants' exit, Lily caught one last glimpse of the banquet hall. Everyone had already returned to their conversations, their meals, their laughter. The incident was over, forgotten, irrelevant. Everyone except Alpha King Thomas. He was still watching her, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. For a moment, their eyes met across the glittering hall. Then Krista shoved her through the doorway. And he was gone. Krista deposited Lily in her tiny room with all the care one might give a bag of garbage. "You stupid, pathetic creature," she hissed, her composure cracking now that they were alone. "You nearly ruined the Luna's banquet. Do you have any idea what kind of embarrassment you caused?" "I'm sorry," Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Sorry isn't good enough." Krista grabbed her chin, forcing eye contact. "You're being moved. Starting tomorrow, you'll be working in the lower kitchen scullery work. No more serving the Luna directly. No more being seen by anyone important. You'll scrub pots and wash floors until you either learn your place or quit." Relief and horror warred in Lily's chest. Scullery work was the lowest of the low back-breaking labor in hot, cramped conditions. But it was away from Lolita's chambers. Away from Krista's constant scrutiny. "And let me be very clear," Krista continued, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "If you ever embarrass the Luna again, if you ever breathe a word of complaint to anyone, I will personally ensure you're not just fired, you'll be blacklisted from every pack in the realm. You'll die alone and starving in some ditch, and no one will remember your name." She released Lily with a shove that sent her stumbling. "Be in the scullery at dawn." "And Lily?" Krista smiled, sharp and cruel. "Welcome to the rest of your miserable life." She swept out, slamming the door behind her. Lily collapsed onto her bed, her body finally giving up the fight to stay upright. She stared at the ceiling, too exhausted even to cry. This was it. Rock bottom. She'd fallen as far as she could fall, and there was no one coming to save her. There never had been. Dawn came too soon. Lily dragged herself out of bed, every muscle screaming in protest. She changed into the rougher work uniform designated for scullery staff, coarse gray fabric, already stained and worn. The lower kitchens were located in the palace's basement, accessible only through a narrow staircase that spiraled down into darkness. The air grew hotter and more oppressive with each step, thick with steam and the smell of lye soap. The head scullery maid, Blanche Gibson, was a hard-faced woman with forearms like tree trunks and zero patience for weakness. "You the new one?" she barked when Lily appeared. "Yes, ma'am. Can you work?" "Yes, ma'am." Blanche looked her up and down, taking in her skeletal frame with obvious skepticism. "We'll see. Station 3 pots and large cookware. You scrub until they shine, no exceptions. Break for lunch is at 2. Dinner at 8. Work ends when the work is done, not before. Questions?" "No, ma'am." "Good. Get moving." The work was brutal. Lily stood at a massive stone sink filled with scalding water and harsh soap, scrubbing enormous pots crusted with burned food. Her hands blistered within the first hour. Her back ached from hunching over. The heat was suffocating, making her dizzy and nauseous. But there was something almost merciful about the mindlessness of it. Scrub, rinse, stack. Scrub, rinse, stack. No thinking required, no interaction, no performance. Just work and pain in the blessed absence of cruelty disguised as kindness. Hours blurred together. When the lunch break was finally called, Lily could barely straighten her spine. She followed the other scullery workers to their separate dining area, smaller than the main servants' hall, less pleasant, but functional. And there, for the first time in weeks, she was given a full meal. Not a feast, just plain stew with chunks of vegetables and bread, a simple apple for dessert. But it was real food, substantial food. enough to actually fill her stomach. Lily ate slowly, afraid her shrunken stomach would rebel. The warmth of the stew spread through her body like medicine. For the first time in forever, the gnawing emptiness eased. "Don't get too comfortable," muttered the worker beside her, a tired-looking man named Wilson Blevins. "The work down here kills most people's appetite anyway. Give it a week." But Lily didn't care about next week. Right now, in this moment, she had food. She had survived another day, and in the twisted logic of her existence, that counted as a victory. Chapter 5. When Hunger Becomes Desperation. 3 months in the scullery, and Lily had learned to survive on muscle memory and spite. The work was relentless. 10, 12, sometimes 14-hour days spent scrubbing pots, washing dishes, mopping floors slick with grease and food waste. Her hands were permanently raw, the skin cracked and bleeding despite the rough salve Blanche occasionally tossed her way. Her back had developed a permanent ache that never quite faded, even in sleep. But she ate. Not well, not abundantly, but enough to keep her body functioning. The scullery staff meals were plain and repetitive, watery stews, tough bread, the occasional piece of fruit past its prime, but it was consistent. No games, no hierarchies, no cruel withholding disguised as discipline. Down here in the basement, hidden from the palace's glittering facade, the rules were simpler. Work hard, keep your head down, don't complain. Lily excelled at all three. She'd even developed something resembling camaraderie with a few of her fellow workers. Wilson Blevins, gruff but fair, showed her tricks for getting baked-on food off faster. Maria Lyons, an older woman with kind eyes, sometimes slipped her extra bread when Blanche wasn't looking. They didn't ask questions about why she'd been demoted from the Luna's household. They didn't care. In the scullery, everyone was equally invisible. It should have been enough. Lily told herself it was enough. But late at night, lying in her narrow bed, she could still feel the ghost of hunger clawing at her insides. Not the physical kind anymore, but something deeper. A hunger for dignity, for recognition, for proof that her existence mattered, even a little. She hated herself for wanting it. She hated herself more for not being able to stop. The palace was preparing for something big. Even in the basement, the scullery staff could feel the change. More dishes to wash, more elaborate meals being prepared, the kitchen staff above them working double shifts. Fragments of conversation drifted down through the floorboards. Alpha King's birthday celebration. Envoys from 5 territories. Luna wants everything perfect. Lily scrubbed a massive roasting pan and tried not to think about it. Palace politics weren't her concern anymore. Let the beautiful people have their beautiful party. She'd stay down here where she belonged. But on the 3rd day of preparations, Blanche called her over. "You," she said, pointing a thick finger at Lily. "Head cook needs extra hands upstairs for the pre-feast prep. You're small enough to fit in the tight spaces they need cleaned. Report to the main kitchen, Station 7. Lily's stomach dropped. I'd rather stay here, ma'am. I work better down here." Wasn't a request. Blanche's expression softened slightly. "It's just for a few days. Once the celebration's over, you come back down. But right now, they need bodies. And you're able. Go." There was no arguing with Blanche. Lily climbed the spiral staircase with dread sitting heavy in her chest. The main palace kitchen was chaos, dozens of cooks and assistants rushing between stations. Flames roaring in massive ovens. The air thick with the smell of roasting meat and baking pastries. Head cook Mona Nixon spotted her immediately. "You're the scullery girl?" Her tone was clipped, impatient. "Yes, ma'am. Station 7 behind the dry storage. There's a crawl space that hasn't been properly cleaned in months. We need it spotless before the health inspection. You'll find supplies in the closet." Lily nodded and made her way to the indicated area. Station 7 was tucked in the back corner of the kitchen, partially hidden behind stacks of flour sacks and dried goods. And there, just as Mona had said, was a small door barely 3 feet high that opened into a dark, narrow crawl space. Lily grabbed a lantern, a bucket of cleaning supplies, and steeled herself. The crawl space was worse than she'd imagined. Dust thick as carpet, cobwebs hanging in sheets, suspicious stains on the stone floor. It was barely tall enough to crouch in, forcing her to work on her hands and knees. But it was quiet. Private. Away from watchful eyes and sharp voices. She could do this. Lily lost herself in the work, scrubbing methodically, her world narrowing to the small circle of lantern light. Hours passed. Her knees ached from the hard stone. Her lungs burned from the dust. But slowly, steadily, the space transformed from filthy to clean. She was almost finished when she heard voices outside the crawl space. "Absurd amount of waste," someone was saying. A woman's voice, cultured and annoyed. 3 entire trays of canapés that weren't even touched. And those chocolate tortas the Luna rejected because they weren't aesthetically perfect. Perfectly good food, just thrown away. "Orders are orders." Another voice replied, Mona, sounding weary. "The Luna wants only the best displayed. Everything else goes to the waste bins. Such a shame. My grandmother would have boxed my ears for wasting food like this." Their voices faded as they moved away. Lily sat frozen in the darkness, her heart pounding. Waste bins. Perfectly good food. Thrown away. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was dangerous, desperate. Exactly the kind of thing that had gotten her demoted in the first place. But that old hunger, the deep one, the one that had nothing to do with food, roared to life inside her. She wasn't stealing. She wasn't taking what belonged to someone else. She was just reclaiming what would be thrown away anyway. Just this once. Just to prove she could. Lily waited until the kitchen had quieted. Until most of the day staff had rotated out, and the skeleton night crew had taken over. She emerged from the crawl space, dirty and exhausted, and returned her cleaning supplies to the proper closet. And then, her heart hammering against her ribs, she made her way to the waste area. It was located in a small courtyard behind the kitchen, a space lined with large bins, where food scraps and ruined dishes were temporarily stored before being hauled away. Lily had passed it 1,000 times during her service, never giving it much thought. Now she approached it like a shrine. The bins were tucked into an alcove, partially hidden from view. Lily glanced around, no one in sight. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. Only a single lantern illuminated the courtyard, casting more shadows than light. She lifted the lid of the nearest bin. The smell hit her first, not rotten, not yet, but the mixed aroma of wasted luxury. And there, sitting atop the pile of scraps like treasure, were the discarded canapés, smoked salmon on small toasts, cream cheese and herbs. Some of them hadn't even been bitten. Lily's hands shook as she reached in. She grabbed a canapé and shoved it into her mouth. The flavors exploded on her tongue. Rich, buttery, perfect. She ate another. Then another. Not because she was hungry, the scullery dinner had been adequate, but because she could. Because for once, she was taking something, claiming something, even if it was garbage. Even if it made her garbage too. She didn't hear the footsteps. She didn't see the figure approach until a voice, deep, male, absolutely commanding, spoke from the darkness. "What the hell are you doing?" Lily's head snapped up, a half-eaten canapé still clutched in her hand. Alpha King Tomas Olsson stood at the entrance to the alcove, his storm-gray eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the ground. For a moment, neither of them moved. Lily's mind went blank with terror. This was it. This was the end. Caught eating garbage by the Alpha King himself. She'd be thrown out, blacklisted, probably executed for the sheer audacity of... But Tomas wasn't looking at her with disgust. He was looking at her with something that might have been horror. "You're..." He stepped closer, his movements slow, almost careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "You're one of the palace servants. I remember you. From the banquet you collapsed." Lily couldn't speak, couldn't move, could barely breathe. Tomas's gaze dropped to the bin, to the food clutched in her trembling hand, then back to her face. And something in his expression shifted, hardened into something cold and terrible. "How long?" His voice was quiet, but there was fury underneath it, barely leashed. "How long have you been eating from the waste bins?" Lily's voice cracked. "This is the first time, I swear. Don't lie to me." The command in his tone made her wolf whimper in submission. "I can see it in your eyes. This isn't the first time." "How long?" Tears burned Lily's eyes, but she forced them back. "A few weeks. Not often. Just when I couldn't." She couldn't finish. Couldn't explain the desperation, the hunger that went beyond food. The way being invisible had slowly eroded her humanity until eating garbage seemed like a reasonable choice. Tomas stared at her for a long moment, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. "Who's your direct supervisor?" "I work in the scullery now. Blanche Gibson. But before, I was in the Luna's household." "The Luna's household." Something flashed in his eyes. "And you're telling me that a servant under my mate's care has been reduced to eating garbage. And no one thought to inform me. It's not. Lily's voice broke. It's not the Luna's fault. She's been nothing but kind. It's me. I'm the problem. I don't work hard enough. I don't eat properly when food is offered. Stop. The single word cracked like a whip. Tomas ran a hand through his hair, his composure fracturing. Stop defending people who've clearly failed you. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Lily saw the exact moment he registered just how thin she was, how her uniform hung off her frame, how her hands shook with more than just fear. When was the last time you had a real meal? He asked quietly. I eat in the scullery. Every day. It's enough. That's not what I asked. His eyes pinned her. When was the last time you had enough food that you went to bed without your stomach hurting? Lily opened her mouth. Closed it. Couldn't remember. The silence stretched between them, heavy with truth. And then Tomas did something Lily never expected. He reached into the bin, pulled out one of the discarded canapes, and looked at it with an expression of absolute disgust, not at the food, but at what it represented. This ends now, he said, his voice carrying the weight of an alpha's command. You're coming with me. What? No, I can't. That wasn't a request. He turned those storm-gray eyes on her, and Lily's wolf immediately submitted, her body moving before her brain could protest. I'm taking you to the head healer. You're going to be examined, fed properly, and then, his expression went cold, deadly. Then I'm going to find out exactly how one of my pack members ended up eating garbage while living in a palace full of food. Lily wanted to protest, to run, to disappear. But the Alpha King's command was absolute, and as he led her out of the alcove, away from the waste bins and the shame and the darkness, one terrifying thought crystallized in her mind. The invisible girl had finally been seen, and nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 6. The Alpha's Fury. The palace healer's quarters were located in the medical wing, a place Lily had never been, never had reason to visit. As Alpha King Thomas led her through the quiet hallways, servants pressed themselves against walls and bowed deeply, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. Lily kept her gaze down, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. She was contaminating the Alpha King's presence with her filth, her weakness, her shameful existence. I should go back, she whispered. I have work in the morning. You're not going anywhere. Tomas's voice was firm but not unkind. Not until I have answers. He stopped in front of a carved wooden door and knocked twice. A moment later, it opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Dr. Chelsea Ramirez, the palace's head healer. Alpha King, she said, surprised. Then her gaze fell on Lily, and her expression shifted to professional concern. What's happened? I need you to examine her, Tomas said without preamble. Full assessment. Nutritional status. Signs of chronic deprivation. Everything. Chelsea's eyes narrowed as she took in Lily's appearance, the hollow cheeks, the trembling hands, the way her uniform hung off her skeletal frame. Of course, come in, dear. She ushered Lily inside while Tomas followed, closing the door behind them. The healer's quarters were warm and smelled of herbs and clean linen. Chelsea guided Lily to a padded examination table. What's your name? She asked gently. Lily Jenkins, ma'am. Well, Lily, I'm going to check a few things. Nothing invasive, I promise. Just need to understand what's going on with your body. Chelsea pulled out a small notebook and a measuring tape. When did you last eat? Today, dinner in the scullery, stew and bread. And before that, lunch. Same thing, mostly. Chelsea glanced at Tomas, who stood near the door with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She turned back to Lily. I'm going to need you to be honest with me, Lily. Have you been eating regularly, 3 meals a day? Lily hesitated. The truth felt like a betrayal of herself, of the illusion she'd worked so hard to maintain. But the Alpha King's presence made lying impossible. Not always, she admitted quietly. For a while, in the Luna's household, there wasn't enough. But in the scullery, I eat every day. How long is a while? 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Chelsea's jaw tightened. She began the examination, checking Lily's pulse, her temperature, her reflexes. She measured her weight, her height, the circumference of her arms. With each measurement, her frown deepened. Severe malnutrition, she murmured, writing notes. Muscle atrophy. Signs of chronic stress. Your pulse is weak. Blood pressure low. She looked up at Tomas. Alpha King. This didn't happen overnight. This is months of sustained deprivation. Something dangerous flashed across Tomas's face. How bad? Another few weeks, and we'd be looking at organ failure. Chelsea's voice was blunt, clinical. Her body has been cannibalizing itself to survive. She's likely been experiencing dizziness, weakness, difficulty concentrating. Her immune system is compromised. Honestly, I'm surprised she's still standing. Lily stared at the floor, shame burning through her veins. This was proof that she was broken, defective, unable to function like a normal person. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried to work harder. This has nothing to do with working hard, Chelsea interrupted firmly. She turned to Tomas. Alpha King, with your permission, I need to keep her here overnight. IV fluids, nutritional supplements. Her stomach has shrunk, we need to reintroduce food carefully or she'll get sick. Do whatever you need to do, Tomas said. His voice was calm, but Lily could hear the fury underneath it, cold and controlled. I want a full written report by morning. You'll have it. Tomas moved toward the door, then paused. He looked back at Lily. And for a moment, something almost gentle crossed his features. You're safe now, he said quietly. No one is going to hurt you. Not anymore. Then he was gone. The door closing softly behind him. Lily sat on the examination table, trembling, while Chelsea prepared an IV line. Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. She'd never been safe. Not in the orphanage. Not in the palace. Not anywhere. But as the healer worked with gentle efficiency, as warm fluids began flowing into her veins, Lily felt something crack open inside her chest. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. Tomas Olsen was not a man given to uncontrolled rage. As Alpha King, he'd learned early that emotions were weapons, tools to be wielded with precision, not unleashed carelessly. He'd fought wars, negotiated treaties, executed traitors, all while maintaining the iron control expected of his position. But as he strode through the palace corridors toward the Luna's chambers, that control was fracturing. A servant, a member of his pack, eating garbage, in his palace, under his rule, while surrounded by abundance. And no one had told him. No one had thought it was important enough to bring to his attention that a young woman was starving to death in the middle of his household. He reached Lolita's chambers, and didn't bother knocking. The guards stationed outside moved to stop him, then wisely stepped back when they saw his expression. Tomas pushed open the doors. Lolita was in her dressing room, seated at her vanity while Krista brushed out her golden hair. Both women looked up in surprise at his entrance. Tomas. Lolita's face lit up with delight. She rose gracefully, moving toward him. What a wonderful surprise. I wasn't expecting you until— Tell me about Lily Jenkins, he said, his voice flat. Lolita blinked, her smile faltering slightly. Who? Lily Jenkins. One of your household servants. Small brown hair, currently looks like she's 3 days from death. Recognition flickered across Lolita's face, followed by careful concern. Oh yes. The poor dear. She was struggling terribly when she worked for me, some sort of eating issue, I think. We tried to help her, but she refused proper meals, kept insisting she was fine. Eventually, we had to move her to less demanding work for her own safety. Is that so? Tomas's tone was dangerously soft. It was heartbreaking, Lolita continued, her eyes shimmering with what looked like genuine emotion. I wanted so badly to help her, but she wouldn't accept it. Some wolves carry their pain in ways we can't reach, no matter how hard we try. She reached for Tomas's hand, but he stepped back. I just found her eating food out of the waste bins, he said quietly. Behind the kitchens. Terrified, half-starved. She told me she's been doing it for weeks. Lolita's expression shifted: shock, horror, dismay, all perfectly calibrated. What? No. That can't be right. We've been feeding her. Have you? Tomas turned to Krista, who'd gone very still. You're the head of the Luna's household staff. When was the last time you personally verified that Lily Jenkins received adequate meals? Krista's composure cracked slightly. She was moved to the scullery months ago. She's no longer under my direct supervision, but she was. For 2 months before that. Tomas took a step closer, and his alpha presence filled the room, heavy and oppressive. So I'll ask again, when she was under your supervision, did she receive adequate meals? Yes, Krista said quickly. Of course, we followed all protocols. Then why did she collapse during the banquet? Why does the head healer tell me she's been malnourished for months? Why was she eating garbage? Silence. Lolita moved between them, her expression pained. Tomas, please. You're frightening, Krista. We did everything we could for that girl. If she was struggling, if she was hiding her eating disorder from us. Stop. The command in his voice made both women flinch. Stop making excuses. Stop blaming a girl who was too weak to defend herself. He turned to Lolita, and for the first time in their mated life, he looked at her with something other than adoration. He looked at her with doubt. I'm launching a full investigation, he said coldly. Into your household management, your staff, every protocol and procedure. If I find that anyone knew about this and did nothing, there will be consequences. Tomas, you can't be serious. I'm deadly serious. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Lolita? That girl's name is Lily Jenkins. Not that poor dear. Not the struggling one. Lily. Learn it. Because she's under my personal protection now, and if anything else happens to her, I will hold everyone in your household responsible. He left before she could respond, his rage a living thing barely contained beneath his skin. Because the worst part, the part that made him want to tear something apart, wasn't just that Lily had been mistreated. It was that she'd defended them. Even while eating garbage, even while starving, she'd tried to protect the people who'd failed her. That kind of loyalty, that kind of broken trust, demanded justice. And Tomas Olsson always kept his promises. By morning, the entire palace was buzzing with rumors. The Alpha King had been seen carrying a servant to the healer's quarters. He'd stormed into the Luna's chambers in the middle of the night. Furious. An investigation was being launched. Someone was in serious trouble. Lily woke in the healer's quarters to find Chelsea checking her IV line. Good morning, the doctor said warmly. How are you feeling? Tired, Lily admitted. But better. Less shaky. Good. That's the fluids working. Chelsea helped her sit up carefully. I'm going to bring you some breakfast, very light. Just broth and toast to start. We need to reintroduce solid food slowly. I should get back to work, Lily said automatically. Blanche will be wondering. You're not going anywhere for at least 3 days. Chelsea's tone brooked no argument. Alpha King's orders. You're to rest, eat properly, and recover. After that, we'll reassess. Lily's chest tightened with anxiety. But my position is secure. The Alpha King was very clear about that. Chelsea squeezed her shoulder gently. You're safe, Lily. I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. Just focus on getting better. After Chelsea left, Lily sat in the quiet room, her mind spinning. The Alpha King had helped her, protected her, promised an investigation. It didn't make sense. She was nobody. Why would he care? But even as the question formed, she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd found her by the waste bins, not disgust, but horror, not judgment, but rage on her behalf. Someone had finally seen her, really seen her, and for the first time in her life, Lily didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. Because when you'd spent your whole existence being invisible, being seen meant everything could change. And change, in Lily's experience, usually meant more pain. But maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe this time, the invisible girl would finally matter. Chapter 7. Unraveling Threads. The investigation began at dawn. Tomas assembled a team he trusted completely. Beta Stephen Baker, his second-in-command and childhood friend. Gamma Timothy Anderson, head of palace security. And Alfred Ashe, the palace's record-keeper who'd served 3 generations of Alpha Kings with unwavering honesty. They gathered in Tomas's private study, away from prying eyes and listening ears. I want everything, Tomas said, his voice hard. Meal logs, staff schedules, financial records for the Luna's household. Interview every servant who worked alongside Lily Jenkins. I want to know exactly how this happened and who's responsible. Stephen exchanged a glance with Timothy. Alpha King, he said carefully. Are you certain you want to pursue this? The Luna is my mate, Tomas finished coldly. Which is exactly why I need to know the truth. If her household has been mismanaged, she has a right to know. If someone has been acting in her name without her knowledge, they need to be held accountable. He didn't voice the darker possibility that Lolita had known, had allowed it, had perhaps even orchestrated it. That thought sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and painful. Understood, Stephen said. We'll be discreet. No. Tomas's jaw tightened. Be thorough. I don't care who gets uncomfortable. A girl nearly died in my palace. Discretion is secondary to truth. Alfred cleared his throat. I've already pulled the household financial records, Alpha King. There are irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The Luna's household budget includes substantial allocations for servant meals and care. But according to these ledgers, much of that money has been redirected to other expenses, decorations, entertainment, gifts for visiting dignitaries. Alfred adjusted his spectacles. The actual amount spent on servant welfare is significantly lower than what was approved. Silence fell over the room. Who authorized the redirections? Tomas asked quietly. Head lady's maid Krista Simmons. She has signing authority for household expenses under the Luna's seal. Timothy leaned forward. I can have her brought in for questioning. Not yet. Tomas stood, moving to the window that overlooked the palace grounds. Dawn light was breaking over the horizon, painting everything gold. First, I want to talk to the other servants, get their stories, build a complete picture before anyone has a chance to coordinate their lies. And the Luna? Stephen asked carefully. Leave her to me. By midday, the interviews had painted a damning picture. Maria Lyons, the scullery worker who'd befriended Lily, testified that the girl had arrived from the Luna's household, looking half dead already. When pressed, she admitted she'd heard whispers among the lower staff that the Luna's household was brutal to new servants, that favorites got preferential treatment while others were slowly pushed out through systematic neglect. Wilson Blevins confirmed it. Everyone knows working for the Luna is either the best position in the palace or the worst. No middle ground. If she likes you, you're set for life. If she doesn't. He shrugged uncomfortably. People disappear. Get reassigned. Some quit entirely. Esther Finley broke down crying during her interview. I tried to help her, she sobbed. I offered to sneak her food, but she was so scared of getting caught. She kept saying it would get better, that she just needed to work harder. I should have done more. I should have told someone. You're telling someone now, Stephen said gently. That's what matters. But the most damning testimony came from a junior maid, named Ashley Coffey, who'd worked in the Luna's household before being reassigned to the gardens. Krista ran everything, she said, her voice shaking. The Luna was always so kind and generous in public, but behind closed doors, Krista made all the real decisions. Who got proper meals, who got rest days, who got punished for small mistakes. She twisted her hands together. There was a hierarchy. If Krista liked you, life was easy. If she didn't, what happened if she didn't? Timothy prompted. You starved. Ashley's voice dropped to a whisper. Not officially. Nothing you could prove. But your meal times would be scheduled when there was barely any food left. Your duties would be arranged so you never had time to eat properly. And if you complained, you'd be labeled as difficult, attention-seeking, mentally unstable. Did the Luna know about this? Ashley hesitated. I don't know. Maybe? Krista was careful. She always made it look like she was just following the Luna's standards for excellence. And the Luna, she only saw what she wanted to see. The servants who adored her, the perfect household, the image of benevolent leadership. Stephen closed his notebook with a snap. We need to bring Krista in. Krista Simmons sat across from the investigation team with her spine straight, and her expression perfectly composed. She wore her lady's maid uniform immaculately, every hair in place, her face arranged in polite confusion. I'm happy to help however I can, she said smoothly. But I must say, I'm surprised by all this. Lily was troubled, certainly, but we did everything possible to support her. Walk me through the meal schedule for the Luna's household servants, Timothy said. Of course. General Palace staff eat in shifts, breakfast at 7, lunch at 1, dinner at 7. The Luna's household staff have slightly adjusted times to accommodate our duties. And what were those times? Breakfast at 8, lunch at 2, dinner at 8:30. Alfred consulted his notes. According to the kitchen logs, by 8 a.m., the breakfast service is largely depleted. Same for lunch at 2 and dinner at 8:30. These times were specifically chosen to ensure minimal food availability. Krista's composure cracked slightly. That's not, we simply had to work around the Luna's schedule. The Luna breakfasts at 9, Stephen interrupted. Lunch is at 1:30, dines at 7. Your servants' mealtimes don't conflict with hers at all. They do, however, perfectly coincide with when the kitchens have the least food available. An unfortunate coincidence. Was it also a coincidence that you redirected thousands of gold pieces from the servant welfare budget to decorative expenses? Alfred pushed a ledger across the table. These are your signatures, your authorizations. Krista stared at the evidence, her face paling. The Luna approved all of those, she said finally. She wanted the household to reflect the dignity of her position. Servants' needs were met through other allocations. Which allocations? Timothy demanded. Because according to every record we have, the Luna's household servants receive the least amount of food, medical care, and basic supplies of any department in this palace, while the Luna's personal quarters receive triple the approved budget for luxuries. Silence. Tomas, who'd been standing silently by the window, finally spoke. Did you know Lily Jenkins was starving? His voice was quiet, but the alpha command underneath it made Krista's wolf instinctively bare its throat in submission. She swallowed hard. She was struggling, but she refused help. She wouldn't see the healer, wouldn't accept extra food. Because you made her believe accepting help meant admitting weakness, Tomas said coldly. Because you created a culture where asking for basic necessities was treated as a character flaw. The Luna wanted excellence. Don't hide behind my mate. The words cracked like a whip. These were your choices. Your cruelty. Own them. Krista's perfect composure shattered. Tears spilled down her cheeks, real ones, Tomas noted with disgust. Not remorse. Fear. I was just trying to maintain standards, she whispered. To ensure the Luna's household reflected her grace. I never meant for anyone to suffer. And yet they did. Stephen leaned forward. How many servants have left the Luna's household in the past year? I don't know. Several. But that's normal turnover. 17, Alfred said flatly. 17 servants reassigned or quit entirely. The highest turnover rate in the palace by a factor of 4. The evidence was damning. Undeniable. Tomas felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest. Because even if Krista was the architect, even if she'd acted independently, she'd done so under Lolita's authority, in Lolita's name. His mate's household had become a place of systematic cruelty, and he'd never noticed. You're dismissed from service, he said quietly. Effective immediately. You'll be escorted from the palace grounds within the hour. Consider yourself fortunate. I'm not pursuing criminal charges. Krista opened her mouth to protest, then closed it when she saw his expression. She stood on shaking legs and was led out by 2 guards. After she was gone, Stephen spoke carefully. Alpha King, we need to address the Luna's role in this. I know. Tomas's voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. Gather all the evidence. I'll speak with her tonight, because the truth was unavoidable now. Either Lolita had known about the abuse and allowed it, which would make her complicit in Lily's suffering, or she hadn't known, hadn't noticed, hadn't cared enough to look beyond the perfect surface her household presented, which made her negligent in a way that was almost worse. Both possibilities meant his mate, the woman he'd loved without question, the Luna he'd trusted to care for their pack, had failed in the most fundamental way, and Tomas wasn't sure which truth would hurt more. Lily spent 3 days in the healer's quarters, slowly learning how to eat again. Chelsea was patient, introducing food gradually, broths, soft breads, steamed vegetables, teaching her how to recognize hunger and fullness, how to trust that food would be there tomorrow, that she didn't need to hoard or panic. It was harder than Lily expected. Her body had adapted to starvation, her mind had learned to ignore hunger signals. Now she had to relearn everything. But the hardest part was the silence. No one came to visit her. No one checked on her progress. The palace hummed with activity outside her window, but inside the healer's quarters, she was isolated. She told herself it was fine. Better to be alone than to face whatever consequences were coming. But late at night, lying in the comfortable bed, her stomach finally full, she couldn't stop thinking about the Alpha King's words. You're safe now. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that being seen, being saved, meant something would actually change. But hope was dangerous. Hope was what had kept her believing things would get better in the Luna's household, right up until she was eating garbage behind the kitchens. So Lily did what she'd always done. She stayed quiet. She stayed still. She waited to see what would happen next. Because invisible girls didn't get happy endings. They just survived. And survival, Lily had learned, was all she could really count on. Chapter 8. The Luna's Truth. Tomas waited until evening to confront Lolita. He found her in the garden pavilion, her favorite retreat, a structure of white marble and climbing roses where she often entertained guests or simply enjoyed the sunset. She was alone, seated on a cushioned bench with a book in her lap, looking every bit the graceful Luna. Beautiful. Perfect. Untouchable. She looked up when he approached, and her face lit with genuine pleasure. Tomas. I was hoping you'd come. I've barely seen you these past few days. She set aside her book and patted the seat beside her. Come. Sit with me. Watch the sunset. He remained standing. We need to talk about your household. The warmth in Lolita's expression dimmed slightly. I heard you dismissed Krista, darling. I understand you're upset about that poor girl, but don't you think that was rather harsh? Krista has served me faithfully for years. Krista systematically starved your servants. Tomas's voice was flat, controlled. She redirected welfare funds to luxury expenses. She created a hierarchy of cruelty that drove 17 wolves out of service in a single year. And she did all of it using your authority. Lolita's eyes widened. What? No, that can't be right. Krista would never. I have the evidence. Financial records, testimonies from multiple servants, documentation from the healer. He pulled a folder from his jacket and set it on the bench between them. It's all there. Everything that's been happening under your seal, in your name. Lolita stared at the folder like it might bite her. Slowly, reluctantly, she opened it and began reading. Tomas watched her face as she processed the information, the shock, the confusion, the dawning horror, or at least, what looked like those emotions. He'd learned in recent days that his mate was an exceptional performer. I had no idea, she whispered finally, her voice shaking. Tomas, you have to believe me. I never authorized any of this. I trusted Krista to manage the household properly. I thought, her voice broke. I thought everything was fine. Better than fine. Everyone always seemed so happy to serve me. The ones you saw were happy, Tomas said quietly. The favorites. The beautiful ones, the charming ones, the ones Krista deemed worthy of your attention. The rest were invisible. Like Lily. Like Lily. Lolita set down the folder with trembling hands. Tears gathered in her emerald eyes, spilling down her perfect cheeks. I failed her. I failed all of them. I was so focused on maintaining appearances, on being the perfect Luna, that I never looked beneath the surface. I never questioned, never investigated. I just assumed. She looked up at him, her expression devastated. How can you ever forgive me? This was the moment. The moment where Tomas should have gathered her in his arms, told her it wasn't her fault, promised that they'd fix things together. But he couldn't. Because something about this confession felt rehearsed. Perfectly calibrated for maximum emotional impact. Did you know? He asked quietly. What? Did you know what Krista was doing? Not the details, maybe, but the general picture. Did you know some of your servants were suffering while others thrived? Lolita's tears stopped as suddenly as they'd started. How can you ask me that? Because I need to know the truth. Tomas took a step closer, his alpha senses reading every micro-expression, every slight change in her heartbeat and scent. Not the performance. Not the version that makes you look best. The actual truth. I am telling you the truth. Lolita stood, her voice rising with indignation. I was deceived by someone I trusted. I made mistakes through ignorance, not malice. How dare you suggest otherwise? I saw Lily, Tomas said, his voice hard. I saw what months of systematic neglect did to her. She was eating garbage, Lolita. Garbage. In our palace, surrounded by abundance, while your chambers overflow with luxury, and you're telling me you never noticed anything wrong? There are hundreds of servants in this palace. She worked in your personal chambers. She changed your sheets, arranged your flowers, organized your wardrobe. You spoke to her directly when she first arrived. You told me yourself you remembered her from the banquet where she collapsed. His eyes narrowed. So, either you're remarkably unobservant, or you chose not to see. Lolita's face went pale, then flushed with anger. I won't be interrogated like some criminal. I'm your mate. You're Luna. I deserve your trust. Trust is earned, Tomas interrupted coldly. And right now the evidence suggests you either knew and allowed it, or were so negligent in your duties that you might as well have. How dare you? How dare I what? Care about a pack member who was suffering? Hold my Luna accountable for her household? Expect basic competence and compassion from the woman who's supposed to help me lead? The words hung between them, sharp and brutal. Lolita stared at him with an expression he'd never seen before, something cold and calculating beneath the hurt. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and he saw something that made his wolf growl low in warning. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded dignity. "I see," she said quietly. "You've already made up your mind. I'm guilty regardless of what I say, what I do. Because a nobody Omega's word is apparently worth more than your mate's. This isn't about Lily's word against yours. This is about evidence, documentation, multiple testimonies, a pattern of behavior that persisted for years, all of which can be blamed on Krista, who I've already lost because of your investigation." Lolita's voice turned bitter. "You've humiliated me in front of the entire palace, dismissed my most trusted servant without consultation, and now you're treating me like a villain in my own home." "Our home," Tomas corrected. "And if you're more concerned about humiliation than about the suffering that happened under your authority, then maybe you are a villain." The words came out harder than he'd intended, but he didn't take them back. Lolita's eyes went cold. "Get out. This is my study. Get out of my sight." Her voice shook with fury. "I won't stand here and be accused by my own mate. When you're ready to apologize, when you're ready to remember who I am and what I've sacrificed for this pack, you know where to find me." She swept past him, her movements stiff with rage, leaving behind the scent of her perfume and the wreckage of their conversation. Tomas stood alone in the garden pavilion, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold. He'd mated Lolita 5 years ago in a political alliance that had become a genuine love match. Or so he'd thought. She was everything a Luna should be: beautiful, graceful, charming. The pack adored her. Visiting dignitaries praised her hospitality. Every event she hosted was flawless. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe he'd fallen in love with the performance, and never looked for the person underneath. Maybe he'd been just as blind as Lolita claimed to be. His beta's words from earlier echoed in his mind. "Are you certain you want to pursue this?" Because pursuing this, really pursuing it, following every thread until he found the truth, might mean discovering that his mate was not who he'd believed her to be. And if that happened, if the Luna herself was revealed as complicit or negligent or simply too self-absorbed to notice suffering right in front of her, the political implications alone could destabilize the pack. But the alternative, pretending nothing was wrong, sweeping Lily's suffering under the rug, allowing the same patterns to continue, was unconscionable. Tomas had built his leadership on justice, on protecting the vulnerable, on ensuring that strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He couldn't abandon those principles now, not even for his mate. That night, Lily had a visitor. She'd been dozing, her stomach finally comfortable with solid food, when a soft knock woke her. Chelsea opened the door to admit Alpha King Tomas, who looked tired and somehow older than he had 3 days ago. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said quietly. Lily scrambled to sit up, her heart racing. "No, Alpha King. Of course not." Chelsea excused herself, leaving them alone. Tomas pulled a chair close to Lily's bed and sat, his posture less formal than she'd ever seen it. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Lily said honestly. "Stronger. Dr. Ramirez has been very kind." "Good." He was silent for a moment, studying her. "I've completed the initial investigation into your situation. The servant who was primarily responsible, Krista Simmons, has been dismissed from palace service." Lily's eyes widened. "Dismissed? Because of me?" "Because of her actions," Tomas corrected firmly. "What happened to you was systematic abuse, Lily, not a misunderstanding, not an accident, deliberate, calculated cruelty, and I won't tolerate that in my palace. But the Luna is dealing with the consequences of her household's failures." His voice was hard. "Whether she knew or should have known is still being determined. But either way, the responsibility falls on her shoulders." Lily felt panic rising in her chest. "Please, I don't want to cause problems. If this creates conflict between you and the Luna, that's not your burden to carry." Tomas leaned forward, his storm gray eyes intense. "Listen to me carefully, Lily. None of this is your fault. You didn't cause this investigation. You didn't create the problems in the Luna's household. You were a victim of a broken system, and the fact that you're more worried about causing trouble than about justice for yourself tells me exactly how much damage was done to you." Tears burned Lily's eyes. "I just want everything to go back to normal." "Normal was killing you," Tomas said bluntly. "So no, things are going to change. You're not returning to the scullery or any other position where you might be vulnerable to retaliation. You're being reassigned to my personal staff under Beta Stevens' direct supervision. Adequate meals, fair hours, actual protection. I don't deserve." "Stop." The command in his voice made her wolf whimper. Then his expression softened. You deserve basic care and dignity. Every member of my pack does. The fact that you think otherwise is exactly why this investigation was necessary." Lily stared at her hands, overwhelmed and terrified in equal measure. Being seen, being protected, being valued, it felt wrong. Like wearing someone else's clothes, walking in shoes that didn't fit. "Why do you care?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "I'm nobody. Just another Omega. Why does this matter to you?" Tomas was quiet for a long moment. "Because I found you eating garbage," he said finally, his voice rough with something that might have been pain. "And you were so scared when I approached that you looked like you thought I might hurt you for it. Not angry at the injustice. Not demanding better treatment. Just terrified of being caught surviving." He stood, moving to the window. "That moment broke something in me, Lily. Because it means my pack, my responsibility, my people, failed you so completely that you'd rather eat trash than ask for help. And if that's true for you, how many others are suffering in silence?" "I don't know," Lily whispered. "Neither do I. But I'm going to find out." He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes was something between a promise and a threat. "Things are changing in this palace. Starting with making sure you never go hungry again." He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Lily sat in the quiet room, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. The Alpha King cared. Actually cared. Not as a performance or a political gesture, but as genuine concern for her well-being. It was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to her. Because caring meant expectations. It meant being visible. It meant mattering. And Lily had no idea how to be someone who mattered. She'd spent her entire life being nothing. Now she had to figure out how to be something. And she wasn't sure she was strong enough for that. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Word spread through the palace like wildfire. The Alpha King had dismissed Krista Simmons. The Luna's household was under investigation. A lowly servant, one nobody had even noticed, had somehow triggered a reckoning that was shaking the very foundations of palace hierarchy. Servants whispered in corners. High-ranking staff walked on eggshells. And everyone, absolutely everyone, was terrified of being next. Lily felt it the moment she left the healer's quarters. Dr. Ramirez had pronounced her well enough to resume light duties, and true to his word, Alpha King Tomas had reassigned her to his personal staff. Beta Stephen Baker himself had come to escort her to her new quarters, a small but comfortable room in the administrative wing, leagues better than the cramped servants' quarters she'd occupied before. "You'll be working as a file clerk initially," Stephen explained as they walked. "Organizing documents, maintaining records, light administrative tasks, nothing physically demanding while you continue to recover." "Thank you, Beta," Lily said quietly, still unable to believe this was real. Stephen stopped, turning to face her with kind but serious eyes. "The Alpha King has made your protection a personal priority, Lily. That means if anyone, and I mean anyone, gives you trouble, you report it to me immediately. No exceptions. Understood?" "Yes, Beta. I mean it. No suffering in silence. No trying to handle things yourself. You speak up." His expression softened. "The Alpha King believes in you. Trust that." But as they continued through the palace, Lily felt the stares, heard the whispers that cut off when she passed, saw the resentment in eyes that had never noticed her before. She'd become visible, and visibility, she was learning, came with a price. Her new workstation was in the records office, a quiet, book-lined room where 3 other clerks worked under the supervision of Alfred Ashe. The elderly record keeper greeted her with professional courtesy, showed her to her desk, and explained her duties with patient precision. The other clerks were less welcoming. 2 of them, Bob Love and Sam Lynn, nodded politely but kept their distance, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. The third, a sharp-eyed young man named Rudy Hand, watched her with barely concealed hostility. "So you're the one," he said after Alfred had returned to his private office. Lily looked up from the stack of files she was alphabetizing. "I'm sorry?" "The one who got Krista fired. The one who's got the Alpha King's personal protection." His tone dripped with sarcasm. "Must be nice. Playing the victim. And getting special treatment." "I didn't," Lily's voice faltered. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Right. You just happened to collapse at a banquet in front of everyone important. Just happened to be found by the Alpha King himself. Just happened to trigger an investigation that's making everyone's lives harder." Rudy leaned against her desk. "Awfully convenient timing, don't you think?" "Rudy, that's enough," Bob said quietly from his station. Is it because I'm just saying what everyone's thinking? She comes here with her sob story, gets special treatment, and now half the palace is walking on eggshells wondering if they're next. Lily's hands trembled as she clutched the files. This was exactly what she'd feared: resentment, accusations, being blamed for consequences she'd never wanted. I just wanted to work, she whispered. I never asked to cause problems. Well, you did. Rudy straightened, his expression cold. So maybe you should keep your head down and stop acting like you're something special just because the Alpha King feels guilty. He returned to his own desk, leaving Lily shaking with humiliation and anger she had no outlet for. This was her life now. Protected by the most powerful wolf in the territory but resented by everyone else. Safe from starvation but drowning in hostility. She'd traded one form of suffering for another. The first week in the records office was a study in isolation. Lily worked diligently, arriving early, staying late, making herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. She ate her meals alone in the staff dining hall, ignored the whispers that followed her, kept her eyes down and her mouth shut. Alfred was kind in his distant, professional way. Bob and Sam eventually warmed to neutral politeness. But Rudy's hostility never wavered, and Lily could feel it like a constant pressure at her back. The only bright spot was Esther. Her friend from the kitchen sought her out during lunch one day, sliding into the seat across from her with a fierce hug that nearly knocked the breath from Lily's lungs. Thank the moon goddess you're okay, Esther breathed. I heard what happened, everyone's heard, but actually seeing you looking healthier. Tears gathered in her eyes. I was so scared I'd lost you. I'm fine, Lily said, though her voice cracked. Better than fine. I have a good position now, proper meals, a decent room. But are you happy? The question hit harder than it should have. Lily opened her mouth to say yes, to perform gratitude, to insist everything was perfect now. But Esther knew her too well. It's harder than before in some ways, Lily admitted quietly. Everyone knows what happened. They're either scared of me because I'm under the Alpha King's protection, or they resent me for causing trouble. I feel like I'm on display all the time, like everyone's waiting for me to fail or prove I'm not worth all this attention. That's not your fault, Esther said fiercely. You didn't do anything wrong. I know. But knowing that and feeling that are different things. Esther squeezed her hand. Give it time. People will move on to the next scandal. The whispers will die down. And anyone with half a brain knows you deserved better than what you got. Lily wanted to believe her, but later that afternoon, as she was filing documents in one of the archive rooms, she overheard a conversation that shattered any hope of things getting better. Investigation expanding beyond the Luna's household, someone was saying. Another clerk, she thought, though she couldn't see them from her position behind the tall shelves. Seriously? What else could they possibly be looking for? Apparently the Alpha King wants a full audit of all household management practices. Every department. Every supervisor. He's paranoid now, thinking abuse might be happening elsewhere. All because of that Jenkins girl. This is ridiculous. Is it though? I heard testimonies from the Luna's former servants. Sounds like it was pretty bad. So what? She should have quit if it was so terrible. Instead, she stayed, played the martyr. And now we all have to deal with increased scrutiny and regulations. That's not fair. Life's not fair. But making the entire palace suffer because one Omega couldn't handle her position. That's not justice. That's overreaction. Lily stood frozen behind the shelves, the file in her hands forgotten. They were right, in a way. Her suffering had triggered something much larger than herself. The investigation was disrupting palace life, making people uncomfortable, forcing scrutiny where before there had been comfortable complacency. Maybe she should have just quit. Maybe she should have suffered in silence and disappeared quietly, rather than becoming this catalyst for chaos. Maybe being invisible had been better after all. That evening, Lily returned to her new quarters feeling more exhausted than any physical labor had ever made her. She sat on her comfortable bed, stared at her full meal tray, and felt nothing but emptiness. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Come in, she called, expecting perhaps Esther or Alfred with some administrative question. Instead, Alpha King Tomas entered, and Lily shot to her feet immediately. Alpha King, Sit, he said, not unkindly. I'm not here in an official capacity. I just wanted to check on you. Stephen mentioned you seemed troubled. Of course Beta Stephen had noticed. Lily cursed her inability to hide her emotions. I'm fine, she said automatically. Lily. Tomas's voice carried that alpha command that made lying impossible. The truth. She sank back onto the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. People resent me. They think I'm causing problems, that your investigation is my fault, that I'm getting special treatment I don't deserve. The words tumbled out faster, months of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. And maybe they're right. Maybe I should have just left when things got bad, instead of staying and creating this mess. That's what you think this is? Tomas asked quietly. A mess you created? Isn't it? No. He moved to sit in the small chair by her desk, his posture less formal, more human than she'd ever seen. This is a necessary correction. A wound that needed to be lanced before it could heal. You didn't create the problems in this palace, Lily. You just had the misfortune of being the one whose suffering finally made them visible. But everyone's lives are harder now because of me. Their lives are harder because they're being held accountable. There's a difference. His storm gray eyes held hers. Let me tell you something about leadership. Real leadership, not the performance kind. Sometimes doing the right thing makes you unpopular. Sometimes protecting the vulnerable means disrupting the comfortable. And if people resent you for surviving, for bringing injustice to light, that says everything about them and nothing about you. Lily wanted to believe him. But years of being nothing, being worthless, being the problem were hard to overcome. I just want to be normal, she whispered. Not special, not protected, just normal. Normal was killing you, Tomas said, echoing his words from days before. And I won't apologize for refusing to let that continue. He leaned forward, his expression intense. You matter, Lily. Your well-being matters, your safety matters, and anyone who tells you otherwise is wrong. But the Luna is dealing with her own reckoning. Something dark crossed his face. Lolita and we're not in a good place right now. The investigation has revealed things about her household, about her leadership, that I can't ignore. Whether she knew or should have known, the fact remains that you and others suffered under her authority. That matters more than palace politics or my personal feelings. Lily's chest tightened. I don't want to come between you and your mate. You didn't. Her choices did. Tomas stood, moving to the window. Do you know what the hardest part of leadership is, Lily? It's not making the big decisions or fighting the obvious battles. It's looking at the small things, the suffering that happens in shadows, the injustice that's become so normalized nobody questions it anymore. It's seeing what everyone else has learned to ignore. He turned back to her. You made me see. And I hate that you had to suffer for that to happen. But I'm grateful you survived long enough to make it impossible to ignore. So no, you're not the problem, you're the solution. Even if it doesn't feel that way right now. After he left, Lily sat in the quiet of her room, his words echoing in her mind. You matter. 2 words. Simple words. Words she'd never believed about herself. But maybe, just maybe, she could start to learn. Chapter 10. The Invisible No More. 3 months after Alpha King Tomas found Lily eating garbage behind the palace kitchens, the Crystal Moon Palace had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. The investigation had concluded with sweeping reforms. New protocols for servant welfare. Mandatory oversight of household budgets. Anonymous reporting systems for abuse or neglect. Regular check-ins by Beta Stevens' staff, to ensure no one slipped through the cracks again. Krista Simmons had been banished from the territory entirely, her crimes documented and her name blacklisted across 5 allied pacts. 3 other senior staff members from the Luna's household had been dismissed for complicity or negligence. And Luna Lolita Conley herself had been stripped of household management authority. The official statement called it a restructuring to better serve pack needs. But everyone knew the truth. The perfect Luna had been found wanting, and the Alpha King had not forgiven her. Their mating bond remained, unbroken but strained. They attended public functions together, maintained appearances for the pack, but the warmth that had once defined their relationship had frozen into something cold and political. Some whispered it was tragic, a love destroyed by one servant's accusations. Others whispered it was justice, a leader finally holding his partner accountable. Lily tried not to think about it at all. She stood in the records office, organizing the latest batch of trade agreements, when Alfred approached with an unusual expression, something between pride and concern. Lily, the Alpha King requests your presence in his private study. Her stomach dropped. Did I do something wrong? On the contrary. I believe he has a proposal for you. Alfred's weathered face creased in a rare smile. You've proven yourself quite capable these past months. Don't look so frightened, child. This is a good thing. But as Lily climbed the stairs to the administrative wing, her heart hammered with anxiety. Being noticed by the Alpha King had saved her life, yes, but it had also made her life infinitely more complicated. She'd learned to navigate the resentment, the whispers, the constant awareness that she was being watched and judged. She'd survived. She'd even begun to thrive, in small ways, but she still felt like an imposter wearing someone else's life. Tomas's private study was a warm room lined with books and maps, dominated by a massive desk covered in documents. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression eased. "Lily, thank you for coming. Please, sit." She perched on the edge of the chair across from him, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "I wanted to discuss your future," Tomas began without preamble. "You've excelled in the records office. Alfred speaks highly of your work ethic and attention to detail. But I think you're capable of more." "I'm content where I am, Alpha King," Lily said quickly. I'm not offering this because I think you need special treatment," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering this because you've earned it. There's an opening for an assistant to the pack historian, research, documentation, interfacing with scholars from other territories. It's a prestigious position, Lily, one that would give you real authority and visibility." Visibility. The word landed like a stone in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted quietly. "Why not?" "Because..." She struggled to articulate the fear that had haunted her for months. "Because everyone will say I only got it because of what happened. Because you feel guilty. Because I'm your charity case." "And what do you say?" Lily looked up, startled by the question. Tomas leaned back in his chair, his storm-gray eyes steady on hers. "I'm not asking what others will think. I'm asking what you believe about yourself. Do you think you're capable of this position?" I think I could learn it. I'm good with details. With organization. I like research." "Then that's all that matters." His voice was firm. "Let me tell you something I've learned through this entire ordeal. People will always have opinions. They'll judge, they'll gossip, they'll create narratives that serve their own comfort. You can't control that. But you can control whether you let their opinions dictate your choices." He pulled a folder from his desk and slid it toward her. "This is a detailed job description, expectations and salary. Yes, salary, not just room and board. Look it over. Think about it." "But Lily?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Stop making yourself small to make others comfortable. You survived hell. You earned the right to take up space." Lily took the folder back to her quarters and read every word 3 times. The position was everything Tomas had described: challenging, prestigious, a real career rather than just survival work. The salary alone was more than she'd ever imagined earning. It would mean independence, security, a future beyond just making it through each day. It would also mean being visible. Permanently, irrevocably visible. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wrestling with fear and possibility. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. When she opened the door, Esther stood there with 2 mugs of tea and a determined expression. "Heard you got offered the historian's assistant position," Esther said, pushing past her into the room. "And I know that look on your face. You're about to talk yourself out of it." "I'm not." "You are. You're going to convince yourself you don't deserve it, that you'll fail, that people will judge you." Esther set down the tea and gripped Lily's shoulders. "Listen to me. You are the bravest person I know." "I'm not brave. I just survived." "Exactly. You survived years of cruelty. You survived systematic starvation. You survived being invisible in a palace full of people. And when the most powerful wolf in the territory finally saw you, instead of disappearing again, you let yourself be seen." Esther's eyes blazed with fierce affection. "That's not weakness, Lily. That's strength. And if you don't take this position, if you make yourself small one more time, I will personally drag you to the Alpha King's office and accept it on your behalf." "Despite everything," Lily laughed. "You wouldn't. Try me." They drank their tea in companionable silence, and for the first time in months, Lily felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of fear that had lived in her chest for so long. Maybe Esther was right. Maybe survival was its own form of bravery. Maybe she'd earned the right to want more than just existing. The next morning, Lily knocked on the Alpha King's study door with the folder clutched in her hands, and her decision made. "Come in," Tomas called. She entered, squared her shoulders, and met his eyes directly. "I accept the position." Pride flashed across his face. "Good. You start next week. The pack historian, Nelson Buckley, is expecting you." "Thank you, Alpha King," For everything, for seeing me, for not letting me disappear. You're welcome. But Lily? He stood, moving around his desk. I need you to understand something. What happened to you, the investigation, the reforms, all of it, that wasn't charity, that wasn't me doing you a favor. That was justice. Delayed, inadequate justice, but justice nonetheless. He paused, his expression growing serious. And I need to apologize. Because as Alpha King, the suffering that happened in my palace is ultimately my responsibility. I should have noticed. I should have created systems that prevented it. I should have looked beyond the perfect surface to see the cracks underneath. You couldn't have known. I should have made it my business to know. His voice was heavy with regret. That's the burden of leadership. Not just punishing evil when it's revealed, but creating a world where evil has fewer places to hide. I failed at that. You paid the price. And I'm sorry. Lily stared at the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the territory, apologizing to her, a former nobody Omega. Something in her chest cracked open, and tears she'd been holding back for months finally spilled over. I forgive you, she whispered. And I hope someday I can forgive myself too. For what? For believing I deserved it. For making myself so small I nearly disappeared entirely. Tomas stepped forward, and shocking them both, pulled her into a brief, paternal hug. You deserved better. You've always deserved better. And I promise you, as long as I'm Alpha King, you'll have it. 6 months later, Lily stood in the palace library, surrounded by ancient texts and research notes, completely absorbed in documenting the Pax Treaty history. She'd grown into her position with surprising ease. Nelson Buckley was a patient teacher who valued her meticulous attention to detail and sharp memory. The work was intellectually demanding and deeply satisfying, the opposite of the mindless survival labor she'd endured before. She'd gained weight, her face filling out, her body growing strong again, her hair shone with health. Her eyes had lost that haunted, desperate quality. She realized with shock when catching her reflection. Almost happy. Lily. She turned to find Beta Stephen approaching with an unfamiliar wolf, a scholarly-looking man with kind eyes and an armful of books. This is Dr. Jeffrey Martin, visiting historian from the Silverpine Pack, Stephen introduced. He's collaborating with Nelson on the Interpack Alliance research. Jeffrey, this is Lily Jenkins, our assistant historian. Jeffrey's face lit up. The Lily Jenkins? I've read your annotations on the Three Territories Accord. Brilliant work. You caught a dating error that scholars have been missing for decades. Lily flushed with pleasure. Thank you. I just noticed the seasonal markers didn't align with the documented timeline. Exactly. That's the kind of detailed analysis we need. Jeffrey launched into an enthusiastic discussion about research methodology, and Lily found herself matching his energy, debating theories, suggesting cross-references. When he finally left to meet with Nelson, Stephen lingered with an amused expression. You've come a long way, he observed. I suppose I have. Lily touched the leather journal Tomas had given her, now filled with notes and observations and small moments of joy she'd started recording. It's strange. I spent so long trying to be invisible that I forgot what it felt like to be present, to engage with the world, instead of just surviving it. The Alpha King will be glad to hear that. He asks about you often, you know. He does? Says you remind him why he does this job, why protecting the vulnerable matters more than political convenience. Stephen's expression grew serious. What happened to you changed him, Lily. Changed all of us, really. Made us look at things we'd learned to ignore. And the Luna? Lily asked quietly. She rarely saw Lolita anymore. The former Luna had retreated from public life, her household dissolved, her authority revoked. Still here. Still mated to the Alpha King. But it's complicated. Stephen sighed. She made mistakes. Whether through malice or negligence is still debated. But the consequences are real. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Lily thought about that as she returned to her research. Trust, visibility, the courage to take up space instead of apologizing for existing. She'd learned all of those things the hard way. But she'd learned them. That evening, Lily sat in the palace gardens, the same gardens where she'd once gathered lavender for the Luna's bath, invisible and starving. Now she sat on a bench as an equal, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She held her journal, recording the day's small victories. A successful research breakthrough, Jeffrey's praise, the way Stephen had called her by name with respect in his voice. Beautiful evening. She looked up to find Alpha King Tomas approaching, He'd aged slightly in the past months, lines of stress around his eyes, silver threading his dark hair, leadership's burden, worn visibly. Alpha King. She moved to stand, but he waved her back down. May I join you? Of course. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Finally, Tomas spoke. I wanted to thank you. For what? For surviving. For being brave enough to let yourself be seen. For not giving up when every instinct probably told you to disappear. He turned to her, his expression open and genuine. You changed this pack, Lily. Made us better. Made me better. I didn't do anything special, Lily protested. I just existed. Suffered. Got lucky that you found me. No, his voice was firm. You did something incredibly brave. You let yourself matter. You accepted help even when it was terrifying. You chose visibility over invisibility, even knowing the cost. That's not luck, that's strength. Lily felt tears gather, but this time they were good tears, healing tears. I'm still learning, she admitted. How to take up space. How to believe I deserve good things. How to be visible without apologizing for it. We're all still learning. Tomas smiled, sad and sincere. That's what growth is, continuous learning, continuous adjustment, continuous choosing to be better than we were yesterday. He stood, preparing to leave, then paused. One more thing. The pack is hosting a gathering next month, a celebration of the reforms, a recommitment to our values. I'd like you to speak. Tell your story, in your own words. Show the pack that change is possible, that survival is worth celebrating. Terror and excitement warred in Lily's chest. I don't know if I can. You can. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. He smiled. You're not invisible anymore, Lily. And I think it's time you stopped trying to be. 1 month later, Lily stood before the assembled pack, hundreds of wolves gathered in the great hall, their eyes on her. She'd written and rewritten her speech a dozen times. Rehearsed it until the words lost meaning. Considered backing out 100 times. But here she was, standing at the podium, the Alpha King's faith in her a warm weight in her chest. She looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. She saw Esther in the front row, giving her an encouraging smile. Saw Stephen and Nelson and Alfred, all nodding their support. Saw Lolita in the back, her expression unreadable. And she saw Tomas, standing to the side, his storm-gray eyes steady on hers, silently telling her, you matter. Your story matters, don't make yourself small. Lily took a deep breath and began to speak. My name is Lily Jenkins. 6 months ago, I was invisible. She told her story. Not the sanitized version, not the comfortable version, but the truth, raw and painful and real. She talked about hunger, about humiliation, about the slow erosion of dignity that came from being systematically erased. She talked about being found, about being seen, about the terrifying, painful process of learning to believe she deserved better. And she talked about change, how one person's courage could ripple outward, how justice delayed was still justice, how visibility, though frightening, was better than the alternative. When she finished, the hall was silent. Then Esther began to clap. Stephen joined her. Then Nelson, Alfred, dozens of others. The applause built, filling the great hall. And Lily stood in the center of it, visible. Valued. No longer invisible. No longer nothing. She met Tomas's eyes across the room and saw pride there, fierce and genuine. She'd survived. More than survived, she'd transformed. And in doing so, she'd helped transform an entire pack. The invisible girl had become visible, and she was never disappearing again. Epilogue. 2 years later, Lily Jenkins stood in the palace library with a published research paper bearing her name, watching scholars from across the realm debate her theories on ancient pack treaties. She wore professional attire that fit her healthy frame. Her hair was styled, her posture confident. When she spoke, people listened. She'd become, improbably, one of the pack's leading historians. Her work was respected. Her insights valued. She mentored young scholars, advocated for better working conditions for palace staff, and served on the Alpha King's advisory council. She was visible, irrevocably, permanently visible, and she'd learned to be okay with that. Esther had made it a kind guard and worked as head of kitchen staff now, implementing the welfare reforms they'd both fought for. The palace had transformed, safer, kinder, more aware of the invisible suffering that had once flourished in its shadows. Alpha King Tomas and Luna Lolita remained mated but distant, their relationship a casualty of revealed truths and broken trust. Some mourned it. Others called it justice. Lily tried not to think about it at all, because her story wasn't about the Alpha King or the Luna or palace politics. It was about a girl who'd been invisible learning to be seen, about survival transforming into something more, into purpose, into meaning, into a life worth living, about the simple, radical act of believing you matter. And as Lily stood in the library, surrounded by the proof that she did matter, that her voice and her work and her existence had value, she felt something she'd never experienced before: peace. She'd been invisible once. Now she was unforgettable, and that was worth every painful step of the journey.